الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, we have begun our look at the fiqh of mu'amalat, and we began, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by looking at the opening concepts. What is the aqd? Right? And we made some important distinctions that are important to keep in mind. The difference between musawama, negotiation, and aqd. Right? The aqd is deliberate, decisive. Right? We looked at the concept, what is mal? Right? There's two transacting parties. There's ijab from one party, qabul from the other. And when the ijab and qabul take place, what happens? What happens when the ijab and qabul take place? Yeah, the sale happens, but what is the consequence of the sale? No, but why can't you go? What happens when there's... We talked that this is the hukum of the bay'ah. Transfer of ownership, right? This mubadala of the mal, right? So there's two things. There's the mabi' and the thaman. The mabi', the item of sale, used to belong to the ba'i'. And it's interesting, this is a language thing. In English, ba'i' sounds a bit like buyer. Subconsciously, I've seen over the years, many people get confused because of that. And I have too, to be honest. Right? In speaking, the ba'i' is the seller. Right? So the mabi' was with the ba'i'. When the sale takes place, who owns from that moment the mabi'? The mushtari. And when the sale takes place, the mushtari owns the thaman. And they have a right to demand. We'll say, what if the guy hasn't paid yet? That's coming, right? So unless there were a khiyar, unless there was a specified option, right, which we'll be looking at in the upcoming section on khiyarul shart, the option of cancellation, but that needs to be specified. Or an option that arises, such as khiyarul aib, the option to cancel due to defect, right? Because that goes back to the concept of rida that we've emphasized, right? Because a sale transaction, for you to be satisfied with a sale, you're satisfied with something free of blemishes, right? That if I sold you this mic, why did you buy the mic? Because it works, right? So if you bought a mic, unless you were told that I'm selling you this mic as is, and it doesn't work, so it's good for decoration, then you can't come with that. I bayantu al-aib, right? So this is significant, right? This is significant in terms of knowing what these key components are. Then we looked at how the definition, there's things that need to be defined in terms of the items of transaction, right? We took al-awad, al-musharu ilayha. Like if you point to something, I'm selling you this, then the ishara is sufficient, right? I'm selling you this for $10, right? Unless there's a clear aid that even this, it still needs to be the reasonable assumption. It's a pen, it works. We don't need to describe it or anything, unless there's some, it fulfills the conditions of the aib, right? And the conditions for the aib are coming up. Anything that would diminish market value, basically, right? Anything that diminishes market value. So we looked at that. The price needs to be specified in a manner also that does not lead to dispute, right? It needs to be specified in a manner that does not lead to dispute, because yeah, and we looked classically that how would this dispute arise? Classically, the dispute arise because there'd be multiple currencies in the same marketplace. This can also conceivably happen with selling online, for example, etc. Right? Because someone buying from, you know, just Canada and the U.S. We use dollars, they use dollars, right? And depends who. What do you mean by we and they, right? So that's where they need definition. But we try to validate to the extent possible. So it goes to the aghlab. If we didn't say, I sell this to you for 20, the assumption would be, what is the ghalib naqd al-balad? In the majalla, and it's mentioned by the later scholars, so the majalla refers to it from that perspective, that if there are multiple currencies, then it depends. That's why the urf is so important. So for example, if we sold candy for 25, like one piece of candy, what would the assumption be? 25 cents. If we sold a pen for $25, right? If someone said, so if someone sold a car for 25, it's a newish kind of car, you'd assume that you mean 25,000, right? Like someone missed the K, right? So those kinds of things are important to be aware of, right? But also, we see from that you can't just take the masail of of a method and say, oh, therefore the fatwa is such and such, right? Because very often there are nuances involved. We also looked at the issue of deferral of price, right? That the price can be deferred, right? And the price can be deferred. But what's the condition for deferral of price? It has to be, it has to be stipulated, right? That يجوز البيع بثمن حال ومؤجل إن كان الأجل معلوما, right? So if it's not defined, then what happens? Then the assumption would be it's 1 month, right? And that's what the Mutaakhirin gave fatwa on. You can actually find this in Haskafi, both in the Dur al-Mukhtar and the Dur al-Muntaqa, and the Multaqa. You can find it there. So now we mentioned that you can defer the price, right? But you cannot, in general, right? You cannot defer the item of sale, right? In the sense that, let's, except with certain conditions, right? So for example, said, I buy a hat from you for $25. You give me the hat in two months, right? Unless it is a aqd of salam or istisna, right? So because there are conditions and items, I think 200 to 204 of the majalla discuss these. The bay'a has to be mal, it has to be mutaqawwim, right? The item of sale has to be an item of value. Has to be mal, لابد أن يكون البيع مالا، لابد أن يكون البيع متقوما، لابد أن يكون البيع موجودا. It has to exist. The item of sale has to exist now. Because otherwise, like, things could happen, right? And this comes up later, interestingly, because he goes into, um, the shurut of صحة البيع come up when he discusses باب البيع الفاسد, right? باب البيع الفاسد goes into that, which is a few chapters down. But just to point it, that while you can defer the price, you can't defer the item of sale unless it be through a recognized mechanism in the Sharia, which is one is a salam, which is, right, which is salam, which is a type of sale into the future, but it has particular conditions, and that will be coming up, or what's called aqdul istisna, or a manufacturing contract. Like, for example, you go to a tailor to make you clothes, for example, etc. And those have their own conditions, right? Those have their own conditions. So that's important to be aware of, right? That you can't, and the reason is so that there isn't gharar. So, for example, Sidi Hamza has a wonderful cat, and she's pregnant, and the cat has great lineage, beautiful cat, the daughter of a beautiful cat, the daughter of a legendary cat. So there's a lot of competition to buy, the kittens. So what happens? Half a dozen people bid for the cats. But turns out, see, Hamza just thought the cat was pregnant. It actually had a stomach virus that caused its stomach to be inflated. Okay? So lead to dispute, because someone said that they already bought it, they became, it'll cause dispute. So you can't do that. And we'll be looking at that. So there's conditions for the validity of the item of sale. Here he's talked about the thaman. He's delayed talking about the conditions for a valid sale. But they're summarized as 4. It has to be an item of value. Mal mutaqawwim has to be an item of value, of recognized value. Mal and mutaqawwim. Mawjudan, it has to exist, except with the exceptions made, which are basically salam and istisna. The salam forward contract and the manufacturing contract with its conditions. Yani mawjudan. Mamlukan, it has to be owned. Right? Because as the example given in Quduri, what if, let's say Sidi Farid decide to learn hunting. So he's pretty sure he can catch that cat. So he said, I'll sell you that cat for $25. So Sidi Hamza's cat, whom he thought was pregnant, was actually had a stomach infection, and the cat died. Because we don't pray for cats, because they don't get the paradise unless you want her there. So he wants to get a substitute cat. So he buys it, but does he own the cat? Not yet. So you can't buy something that is not owned, mamlukan, and the final condition is maqdura taslim, deliverable. Right? Well, let's say Sister Zubaydah bought a fish farm, and Sister Arshia decided to start a local sushi restaurant. So she wants a particular type of fish, and there's only one of them in the pool. So I'll sell you that fish over there for $250. Big fish, you can make a lot of sushi out of it. But can you deliver it? Because it's in a pond. Like, are you sure you can catch it? So we'll be looking at those conditions. But these are conditions for a valid sale. It has to be an item of value. So you can't sell something that is not of, nobody recognizes it as being of value. Mutaqawwim, permitted to use in the Sharia. مال متقوم موجود. The item of sale has to exist. مملوك, it has to be owned. And مقدور التسليم, deliverable. If some of these conditions are not found, what you should do is have a pre-sale. So let's say Sheikh Zubair orders some books from Beirut. Can the ship? They say we've shipped it. Can you now sell those books before they come? No, but you could do a pre-sale, which is like a wa'ad. Okay, I have this shipment coming. Which books do you want, Sidi Zain? They say I want these three. So if you're smart, you sell them before they arrive. Except you can't actually sell them. So that would be a wa'ad, a promise. Right? You've reserved the books, and you set the price and everything. And when you get possession of the books, then you can make the sale. Because when they're still haven't reached you, you don't own them. The books hopefully do exist because they've been shipped, but they're now, are they mamluk? Do you own them yet? Right? That's a discussion. It comes up with shipping. Who's the shipping on? Right? Because the shipping company is an agent. Is the shipping company acting on behalf of the seller or the buyer? And that has significance. We'll look at that when we look at the khiyarat. Right? And it has significance when items get lost. Alhamdulillah, many Muslims have online businesses. Most of them don't look at the ahkam of the shara, but many do. Right? And what if the item got lost? Because if a transaction, the item gets lost, once the delivery has taken place, you own it. You took it already. It depends the shipping company on whose behalf are they acting. If you're the seller, what would you want to do? That the shipping company is acting on behalf of the buyer. These are my goods. Your shipping company took them. Ma salama. I've delivered. The buyer would want to know the shipping is on the seller. Because until it comes to me, I don't have it yet. And these kinds of things have an, and there go back. Of course, you also have to see what is the custom. In our times, very clear, generally, if the item is not undelivered, the assumption is the liability is on the seller, but not always. This happens with online shopping. If you live long enough online, you'll see many smart sellers put in the fine, but you have to make those things clear. Anyways, that's background just to be aware of. Now, the item of sale has to be defined sufficiently so that there isn't non-definition that would lead to dispute. So he tells us, rahimahullah, and where we're beginning today, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى ويجوز بيع الطعام والحبوب مكايلة ومجازفة وبإناء بعينه لا يعرف مقداره وبوزن حجر بعينه لا يعرف مقداره. So it is permitted to sell ta'am. Now ta'am has multiple usages. The word ta'am broadly can be used for food in general. That's a broad usage. But also refers to the staple food, and that's the more and most specifically, what was the staple food of the Arabs? Was grain. Right? Was grain. So that's why he says, وَيَجُوزُ بَيْعُ الطَّعَامِ, it's permitted to sell food. And food here, you can sell food items, food stuff, so to speak. And he says, وَهِيَ الْحِنْطَةُ وَدَقِيقُهَا خَاصَةً فِي الْعُرْفِ الْمَاضِي. And in past urf, past custom, it referred to hinta, which is wheat, and its flour. But that's in a past order. This is before the time of Alam al-Maidani, because in the Damascus marketplace, there's many different grains, right? Many different grains, right? So now, during the time of the Prophet, sha'ir was more common than, like barley was more common than wheat, right? But it referred to just the primary grains, but or it could mean more specifically the like the staple food, like what's the basic food that people rely on, and more broadly just food, right? والحبوب and grains, right? كالشعير, right? Such as such as sha'ir, like barley, with and corn, الذرة وذرة ونحوها مكايلة, right? بالكيل, which is by volume, and also بالوزن, or by weight. ومجازفة, and mujazafa, right, is to sell an amount of it. I sell you this wheat. It's here. I'm not telling you how much it is. So he quotes al-mughrib. We mentioned this, of al-Mutarrizi. وهي يعني البيع والشراء بلا كيل ولا وزن. It's buying and selling without weight and without volume. Right? You get, okay, I'd like, like say, you take a bag worth of let's say I did baskets of grains, like the bulk barn or whatever. You get a bag of something, and you go. It's called Zane's grains, right? So I'd like this much. It's $2. You can do it, right? So that's easy, right? Because here when باع صبرة طعام, right? وبناء بعينه, right? With a specific container. I'd like this much. I'd like this bowl of wheat or grain or dates or whatever for $5. Sure. I don't know how much is in there. Why? Because it's specified in front of us. If I wanted to know how much it was, I could ask to have it weighed. So this would not lead to dispute, right? So it's effectively defined. But what if I got a bowl of dates, like large bowl, and said, I want to buy this bowl of dates. How much it is? How much is it? Sister Zubaydah says it's $5 a kilo. I said, I accept. What's the problem? Do you know how many kilos are there? No. Now, can you judge how much there would be in a bowl this big of dates? How many kilos? Can you judge? Could you judge? Right? So they could be, like, you could be surprised. I didn't know dates are so heavy. Right? So it can lead to dispute. So this is the next issue. Right? ومن باع صبرة طعام كل قفيز بدرهم جاز البيع في قفيز واحد عند أبي حنيفة رحمه الله تعالى إلا أن يسمي جملة قفزانها. Right? If one buy الصبرة is a مجموعة من الطعام. Right? So in the الدر المنتقى it says الصبرة مجموعة من الطعام. Right? It's مجموعة من الطعام. Right? So whoever buys a, you know, right? Whoever's mindset, you know, a an amount, yeah, like a pile of food. Um, kullu qafiz, every measure of it. Qafiz is a certain measure, right? Right, by volume. Every qafiz for 1 dirham, right? The only thing that's specified according to Abu Hanifa is one qafiz. Let's say 1 kilo, 1 kilo for $5. That's where it would be valid. Okay, right? Why? Because the weight is unknown, right? The weight is unknown, and if the weight is unknown, then the price is unknown. Right? The weight or the volume, the amount's unknown, so the price is unknown, except in the single unit. So إلا أن يسمي جملة قفزانها, unless we mention how many kilos there are in this bowl. And unless this was mentioned beforehand, at the time of the contract, or if it was mentioned while they're still together and they agreed, right? So this is according to Imam Abu Hanifa. Why? Because otherwise, the idea of rida, of being, of entering the transaction with mutual agreement, would be vitiated. And this sticks to the principle of Abu Hanifa, being very careful of establishing mutual agreement. So this is legally, this follows his legal reasoning. But there's a practical problem, right? That, are you used to selling, like, those jute bags worth of coffee? Do you trade in coffee? Do you like coffee? But have you ever bought one of those big jute bags of coffee? No. So someone says, I'll sell you this every kilo for $40. Would you have a clue how much, like a jute bag this much would hold of coffee? No. Right, so it could lead to dispute. You're like, I didn't realize this was 80 kilos of coffee. Like, I don't need 80 times 4. That's $2,400. I got they're like 5-6 kilos here, right? But people who trade in the marketplace, they would do this all the time. Right? You're buying and selling. Right? This is, how much is that? How much is that coffee? $40 a kilo. I'll take the Colombian and that Guatemalan. Okay, sure. I'll put it on your tab. But we didn't name how many kilos that there are. Why didn't we name it though? Because it's ma'lum urfan. It's customarily known. We know what how much coffee there is in a jute bag. It was in front of us. As long as the jute bag is full, it wouldn't lead to dispute. And this happens in many forms of trade. So this is one of the issues, right? That here, Imam Abu Hanifa specified, unless before they part, they specified how many kilos is it anyways. Then only then would it be valid. But as the commentary mentions, وقال, 2 lines in, وقال يجوز في الوجهين, that it's valid whether you mention the weight within the majlis or not. It'd be valid. Why? Because alayhi al-amal, people do this all the time in the marketplace, and it doesn't lead to dispute. And the problem with non-definition is that non-definition is problematic because it doesn't lead to dispute, because it leads to dispute, right? Which is why if you went to, let's say that, what's your name, bro? Usman. Let's say Usman decided to start the first ever buffet lunch in the world. No one ever thought of buffet lunch, right? He's just calling it the Usman special, right? Calls it Usman's one man, one plate, right? Like, he didn't think of the word buffet, but the idea. Now, it's a problem, right? Theoretically, what's the problem with the buffet lunch? We're selling, there's a price. Let's say $20 is the price. What is being sold? It's undefined. So theoretically, it could lead to dispute. What if someone ate a lot? It could, you say, oh my God, it could bankrupt me. Okay? But then practically, what happens? There's only so much that people can eat. The only problem that arises is if people cheat. Someone gets a plate and beta, you and my daughter and other people eat and someone takes the laddus home and stuff. That's where the problem arises. So the Sahibain said that this is effectively known, right? And this position of the Sahibain, right, that has many extensions in contemporary issues. So legally, the theoretically more rigorous opinion is the opinion of the Sahibain that the only thing defined is is the one measure, the one qafiz, like 1 kilo. That's what we define to be valid in one. But the person will have the option of cancellation. As the commentator mentioned, it's called khiyaru tafriq as-safqa. The option for cancelling, because what you bought, the item of transaction got separated because you wanted to buy a whole jute bag worth of coffee. But if you tell me the transaction is only valid for 1 kilo, I didn't want 1 kilo. I'm trying to open Seeker's Cup, and I can't do anything with 1 kilo of coffee. We got a lot of people on the weekend. So it doesn't work, right? So that's called khiyar. That the option, if the item of transaction, so if I bought, if I bought 2 cats, and turns out one is actually dead, right? At the time of transaction. I wanted 2. I want to start cat farming. Whatever reason, I wanted 2 cats. I didn't agree to buy 1. Right? But the cat loved Sidi Hamza. When it heard that it's being sold, it died. So the item of sales, one of them is gone. I can either accept the 1 cat for its price, or I can say, I didn't want it, right? And that there's fiqh related to that. But that's called the option out of when khiyar tafriq as-safqa, right? When what the item of transaction, you agree to buy X, this amount of things, and some of it does not enter into the transaction. But the Sahibain said that it's allowed whether you mention the total weight or not in the majlis, the transaction is valid. But before delivery, we have to see how much does it weigh so we can set the final price. And neither party has any option to cancel. If they wanted further definition, if you really wanted to know how much it weighs, you should have asked, right? But it should not lead to dispute, because as long as the bag is full, there's an objective measure for it, it should not lead to dispute. And the customary practices, it does not lead to dispute. So here fatwa is given, as he mentions, according to the Shurun Bulaliya and a whole bunch of other books. And theoretically, Abu Hanifa's position is stronger. That's the issue raised by Al-Kamal ibn al-Humam in Fath al-Qadir. But the fatwa is given on the position of the Sahibain that it's valid, right? Where you say, I sell you this bowl of dates. Each kilo is for $5. We didn't actually measure it. Valid, because the bowl of dates is defined, right? And if I really wanted to know how much it weighs, I should have asked beforehand. So it does not lead to dispute. There's a lot of other applications to the similar concepts in our times. Amongst them things like buffet lunches and so on. But yes, there's a non-definition of the quantity, but it does not lead to dispute. Why? Based on custom. And there's the legal analysis because there's only so much someone can typically eat anyway, right? But a good practice would be that, just in case some eat food champion or something comes, and actually many restaurants, like many of the bigger chains, put that for their buffet lunches. They put up to a maximum of this much, right? They put some kind of limit, or just feed us lots of carbs, right? That's what like all these big chains do, right? They bring you a lot of nice bread because it's cheap and it'll fill you up fast, pasta, etc. Right? So this is one of the positions where the fatwa is on the position of the Sahibain, of Abu Hanifa's companions, not due to strength of evidence, but due to custom, market practice, customary practice. And the position of the Sahibain was taken by the Majalla, the Ottoman Commercial Law Code, as well. It's a weight. It's a measure of volume, right? How much does it weigh? We can look it up. There's no 100%. How much does he mention?
Equal to 36 saw of wheat, which is 26.14 grams or 32.
Something that sounds about right. Yeah. It's a measure. Something like that. Yeah. But the point is not how much it weighs right now. The point is a specified amount of something. This applies. Okay. The food item, and items of sale are of two types, and there's legal term in English for this, but I won't use it. What's the difference between as an item of sale between coffee beans and sheep? If I sell you 2 bags worth of coffee beans, each kilo for $40, and I sell you 40 sheep, I sell you these sheep, we haven't counted, each sheep for $200. What's the difference? No, we've specified each sheep for $200. No, they're all in here. Yeah, the sheep are different sizes, right? So some items are identical. I sell you this pile of Kit Kat candy bars, each one for 50 cents. I promise you they're not fakes from China or something, right? As opposed to, right, they're all the same. Right? Some items that are non-variable. This bag of coffee and that bag of coffee, they're same type, etc. The units of coffee don't vary, but the sheep are different, right? So here, this is the next issue. It's similar to the previous. This is when the units are variable in their qualities. ومن باع قطيع غنم كل شاة بدرهم فالبيع فاسد في جميعها. This is عند أبي حنيفة. Whoever buys the قطيع, whoever buys a group, a collection of cattle, each sheep for this much dirham, then the sale is fasid. It's corrupt, it's voidable in all of them. Why? Because لتفاوت أفرادها, because the units are of different qualities, so it will lead to dispute, right? Even if we specified how many there are afterwards. And this is again according to Imam Abu Hanifa, because it could lead to dispute. Because we don't know first, we don't know how many there are in here, right? Let's say you look at a pen of sheep. I say, I want to buy these sheep. So each one's 200. So I'll buy them all. We didn't agree on the number, because it could end up being more than you expected. And you saw the whole, but once you buy, now you're buying. The ones at the front were bigger. I didn't realize the ones at the back weren't so big. So it could lead to dispute, because they're variable in sizes. The ones in the middle were all bunched up, were all little kids. I don't want that. I thought they're all, so it could lead to dispute, according to Abu Hanifa. Here too, the fatwa is on the position of the Sahibain, that because it's ultimately defined, it's corralled, like it's a group. These sheep, right? The sheep, hopefully not indoors, right? I'm so traumatized in Cairo. I got in trouble with my parents because my parents were out. Some neighbor gifted us a sheep, and the maid said we don't. And for some reason, we kept getting, this is in the 80s, we kept getting gifted sheep around Eid al-Adha. And my dad said, look, we slaughter back home. Like there's families who give it. I don't want sheep in my house. We live in a really nice apartment. It was an apartment. The people at least then would keep sheep either in their house or their garages. I said, I don't want a sheep in the garage nor in my house. So some exuberant neighbor came through, and we had this huge maid. Like she could have been one of those guarding lines in like a football team, because she's big. Like she blocked the whole door. But they just shoved past her. I tried to put up a defense, but I was less than 10. I said, no, my father doesn't want it. They put it in the maid's washroom. My father came in, and he looked tired and frankly hungry and grumpy. And the first thing he hears when he comes home is the bleating of a sheep. So let's just say that there's a group of sheep, right? In a fenced area. Each of these is for this much. Abu Hanifa said, we don't know how many there are, so it could lead to dispute. Plus, they're variable in their numbers, so that too could lead, in their qualities, that could lead to dispute. The Sahibain said, ultimately, if the number is corralled, if you wanted to know exactly how many there are, you could have asked, number one. Number two, this is standard market practice. People buy quickly, as long as the thing is sufficiently defined. This has other ramifications as well. This idea of something being ultimately defined. That's why menus are salvific, right? When you go to a restaurant, let's say the waiter comes, gives you the menu, but you get into a conversation with the waiter. So what's the best? I like asking waiter, what would you recommend? So everything is good. No, but what would you eat? I usually don't listen to them, but just to get their idea, right? They say, well, the chicken bone masala, whatever, chicken boti masala, whatever, best thing on the menu. So I'll get one of those, and with some naan. What naan do you recommend? Did I look at the menu? No. Did I check the price? No. So what if at the end there's a big bill? I said, this is too expensive. Can I complain? No, because even though we didn't agree on the price, but there is a menu. There's a menu of prices. This applies to, and it's made accessible to the customer. And by law, you have to either display it or have a menu. It's illegal not to, actually. It's in commercial law. It applies to. We take it for granted, alhamdulillah. But if that happens, could a customer you go to a restaurant and say, I didn't see the menu. The waiter recommended a bunch of stuff. I got it and it's way too expensive. Is that a credible argument? No. Why? Because the price is ultimately defined, right? Do most restaurants list how much food they're giving you? Do they in menus? Can you complain? No. Theoretically, that's a problem. Even by law, it's a problem. It's actually some countries, especially Europe, because they love regulation, they try to define those. It's very hard to define. Like how much biryani is enough. Right? And say these things are customarily known. Right? They're probably going to give you something around a plateful. Right? Now, could you take the restaurant to court because they didn't give you enough biryani? Only when it's obviously too little, right? Unless you're going to some really fancy, fusion restaurant, whatever. If someone gave you this much biryani, could you take them to small claims court? You probably could. Why? Because it's outside market norms, right? Otherwise, have you ever heard of a dispute? Someone say, "I will not pay for this food because they didn't give me enough." Because most sensible restaurants give reasonable portions. I think probably the portions are too big, actually, right? So that's all non-definition. So if you try to apply these rulings to the day-to-day, you'll notice there's a lot of things around us that are not defined. But a criteria for the price is set. We've defined the unit. We don't know how much we have. When you use your electricity, do you know how much you pay per unit of electricity? I know you don't pay for your electricity, but let's say if you did, do you know how much we pay for per unit? No. But it's defined. Right? It's defined. And there's a meter somewhere that tracks it. Now, if you keep all the lights on and suddenly the bill's huge, can you go to electricity that this is too much? I want to complain. No. Because the per unit price is set. Now, you and the company aren't keeping yourselves updated actively, explicitly on the usage. It does not lead to dispute. When it leads to dispute is because of someone's own shortcoming or there's a flaw in the system, like the system's malfunctioning or something. That's a separate thing. So the same concept here of, if the unit is defined and the total quantity is clear, it does not lead to dispute. It also has to do with things like Uber rides. Right? The unit of the ride is defined. You don't know how long the distance is, so that's not a problem because there's a meter that's being used. It does not lead to dispute. Right? Although if you do go to developing countries, make sure the meter is on, because it leads to loads of fights, even now. Right? You get in the taxi, they say, "How much is it?" Because the meter is not on. They say, "Tawakkal ala Allah," trust in Allah. It leads to dispute. We didn't set the price, and we're not using a meter. Right? Which is why using one of these taxi services is better in some countries than to use the standard taxis, because the standard taxis don't agree on price, and it's like one of the stereotypical things. When you get to the destination, there's a fight because they think you're a foreigner. They want to overcharge you, right? And so it's a bad habit, not because we have bad akhlaq or whatever, but because we have weak systems. We have weak systems. So, anyways, but it goes back to the same principles here. If the unit is set in its price and the total amount is objectively definable, the basis is that those transactions would be permissible. According to the position of the Sahibain, it has many, many applications. Likewise, he says, وَكَذَلِكَ مَنْ بَاعَ ثَوْبًا مُذَارَعَةً كُلَّ ذِرَاعٍ بِدِرْهَمْ وَلَمْ يُسَمِّ جُمْلَةَ الذُّرْعَانِ. Likewise, if one buys a thobe. What is a thobe? What is a thobe? So thobe has three broad usages in Arabic. A thobe is either a garment, right? A thobe, a specific garment, or it can be cloth. But cloth can come in two types. There's some cloth, because of the way cloth used to be produced in old times, يَضُرُّهُ التَّبْعِيض. It'd be a piece of cloth, right? Because people would stitch enough cloth to make a particular type of garment out of it. Right? So they made a small amount of cloth. They weaved it. Now that the tailor takes that and turns it into a qamis or an izar or whatever. That's called ما يضره التبعيض. That if you cut that in half, that kind of thobe, then that was enough cloth to make a shirt. If you cut it in half, can you do anything with it? No. It's not fulfilling its purpose. That was like it was enough cloth to make a suit. But the material for the suit, if you cut it in half, what are you going to do with it? Right? So that's the مسألة here. كذلك من باع ثوبا كذلك أي البيع فاسد. Likewise, meaning the sale is also fasid, corrupt. If one sells a thobe, a piece of cloth, as the commentary mentions, يضره التبعيد, that is harmed by cutting it, by dividing it, مدارعة, per ذراع, per length, right? Per a dhira is 50 centimeters, so one meter of this cloth, let's say. كل ذراع, every ذراع, every 50 centimeters for a dirham. وَلَمْ يُسَمِّ جُمْلَةَ الذُّرْعَانِ, and one did not mention how many total, what's the total length of this cloth. According to Abu Hanifa, it would not be valid even in one dhira. So you have this cloth. So how much is this cloth? Said it's $25 a foot or whatever the measure is. I'll take it. But we didn't say how many feet is it, but it's in front of you. So Abu Hanifa said that this would not be valid even in 1 foot, because no one wants 1 foot of cloth. What are you going to do with 1 foot of cloth? Well, you could, but because it's 1 unit, right? Dividing it would not be of benefit. However, this too, the fatwa is on the position of the sahibain, that piece of cloth, if it's defined, it would be valid to sell. Right? The same principle, right? In the subrat ta'am, right? Each kilo of the coffee is $40. Big bag of coffee. We could have weighed it. This cloth, how much is it? Or I sell a carpet, right? How much is this carpet? This is $45 per foot. Do you know how many feet this carpet is? Can you guess? Yeah, so you're not quite sure, but it's right in front of you. If you really wanted to know, you could have guessed. So all these sales, so according to Abu Hanifa, it could lead to dispute, because you could argue, I've never bought carpets before. I don't know what 1 foot of carpet means, right? So going to Abu Hanifa, not valid. Going to Sahibain, valid, because ultimately the carpet, the carpet doesn't grow and shrink, right? It's not expanding and contracting. Okay. So then, what if one sells something and turns out to be less or more, right? And here too, there are broadly 3 cases. The first case is of things that are similars, things that where the units are similar, like coffee beans, rice, grains, candy bars, right? Each unit is the same. The second is the mutafawit, things like sheep, goats, etc., where the units differ. Third category is something that is sold like it's like the cloth, for example, right? Which is harmed by, where there's a difference between rolls of carpet. The rolls of carpet, does the seller care how many feet of carpet do you buy? No. But individual carpets, would any carpet say, okay, you only wanted 1 foot of carpet, let me just cut this one off. Can you do that with that? Of course not. So that is, so something sold by length, right? Something sold by length, there are these considerations. Now you may say that's far-fetched in our times, but no, it's not. Because there's all kinds of things being sold by unit. Just go online to a marketplace, and they have many of these bulk marketplaces. Things get sold in all these ways. Right? People buy in bulk, right? And they buy weight, by volume, by people who trade in carpets, people who trade in different types of cloth, right? But now, especially with artisan, like someone's getting rare hand knit pieces of some kind of feathery goose or some whatever from some islands. So some elderly ladies stitch this cloth together, so they sell it. Now that is affected by cutting it. So all these cases have different contemporary applications, but they illustrate principles too. So he says, وَمَنِ ابْتَاعَ صُبْرَةَ طَعَامٍ عَلَى أَنَّهَا 100 قَفِيز ب100 dirham. So whoever buys, ibta'a means to أي اشترى. Whoever buys an amount of some food item on condition that it is 100 units for 100 dirham. مثلا, for example, فوجدها أقل, but one found it to be less. Right? So you bought this على, on condition that this is 5 kilos for $50. It turns out to be less. But what was the sale? We bought this bowl of dates on condition that it is 50 kilos for $50, let's say. But what did we buy? Did we buy 50 kilos of dates, or we bought this bowl of dates or this bag of dates? Right? On condition, however, that it's 100 units, 100 kilos, let's say, for 100 dirham, $100, let's say, and we found it less. كان المشتري بالخيار. The buyer has the option of cancellation. Has the option. إن شاء أخذ الموجود بحصته من الثمن. They can take what is there for its share of the price. وإن شاء فسخ البيع. Or they can say, I don't want it. Because maybe they needed. So let's say when they said, I'm selling you this thing of coffee, this large jute bag of coffee, on condition that it is 100 kilos of coffee for $400. Okay. What's the item of sale? It's that large bag of coffee. But we said it's 40 kilos. Turns out it's 38. So what do? You either accept it, but the condition was that it's 40 kilos. So the price would be diminished accordingly. Right? You have a right, because you didn't get 40 kilos of coffee. So if it turns out to be 38 kilos, you would diminish the price accordingly. Or cancel. Right? The buyer couldn't demand full price. I don't care if it's 2 kilos less. That's tough on you. Can't do that. And the seller can't do whatever the seller would want to do there. Right? But why does he have the option of canceling? Because maybe he did need exactly 50 kilos. Because he works for some company. On weekends, they need 50 kilos of coffee for their business. 48 kilos doesn't cut it, regardless of how nice the bag is. Right? And that's different from selling. There's a difference between selling a bag of something on condition that it is X amount of kilos, and buying X amount of kilos of something. There's two separate things. I want to buy, I'm buying this bag of potatoes on condition that it is 50, that's 5 kilos. That's one case. The other is, I want 5 kilos of potatoes. Different. One, I'm buying a bag defined as being 5 kilos. The other, I'm buying 5 kilos. And the two, there are legal differences between that. Keep that in mind. We don't need to go into all the details of how it works out. If you're really nerdy about it, you can look at the Majalla. It mentions a whole section on what happens if there's more or less. وَإِنْ وَجَدَهَا أَكْثَرَ. What if one finds it more than the 50 kilos? Turned out 51 kilos. فَزِيَادَةُ لِلْبَائِعِ. Right? Then the extra rightfully belongs to the seller. Maybe they overstuffed the bag or whatever. So it's not rightfully yours. That's why before parting, people, if something is sold by weight, it is morally obligatory to weigh it before you part. Right? If you didn't want to weigh it, you could make the sale, because the same sale you could do, I'll buy that bag of coffee. How many? Right? You could buy, you want 50 kilos of coffee, you could buy it broadly in 3 ways. You could either say, sell me 50 kilos of that coffee. Then he has to give you exactly 50 kilos. Now that's one case. What the agreed upon is 50 kilos for this much. Or you can say, how much is that bag? I want that big bag, that bag of coffee. But the condition is it's 50 kilos. I'm not buying 50 kilos. I'm buying the bag. It's described as being 50 kilos. But I don't want the hassle. Like, I want that coffee. I haven't had coffee like that. Like, there's some unique coffee, right? This is ethically sourced civet coffee from Indonesia. And organic. Wow. And the guy says, okay, how much is it? 50 kilos. Say, oh, but my scale's not working right now. It's okay. Just sell me the bag. Right? If I said on condition that it is 50 kilos, then we'd have to weigh it, etc., and it gets messy. And these are ethical implications. Because I've accepted the bag. I go home, it turns out it's 39 kilos. I can't do anything. Because we didn't, the transaction, one is, I bought 50 kilos of ethical civet coffee. The other is, I bought a bag of coffee on condition that it's 50 kilos. The third is, I bought a bag just generally described as containing 50 kilos, but it's not a condition of the sale. Right? Like I bought a cat, and part of the description is, what would you name your cat? What? Daisy. Okay, Daisy described as being 5.6 kilos. Is that a condition for the sale of a cat? No, that's just a wasf. That's a description. Right? Now maybe I'm buying the Daisy to feed my, I don't know what creature, right? So I say, I'll buy Daisy on condition that she's 5.6 kilos. That's very different now, right? Of course, don't do that with a cat because animals fluctuate in weight, but it becomes very different, right? One is just a description. So these are 3 ways to sell coffee, right? So if in the case where, we said subrat ta'am, an amount of food that's 100 kilos, each kilo for $1, then if it's less, you take it by its share of the price. وَإِنْ وَجَدَ أَكْثَرَ فَزِيَادَةُ لِلْبَائِعِ. But if it's more than that, the extra belongs to the seller, because the weight there was a condition. And they say, right, that al-miqdar yuqabiluhu hissatuhu min al-thaman, right? That an amount, right, specified amounts, you consider their share of the price, right? This is وَمَنْ اشْتَرَى ثَوْبًا. Now, what if one buys a piece of cloth, right? A piece of cloth. And the piece of cloth here would include, this is يَدُرُّهُ التَّبْعِيض, right? This is like, it's actually the simpler example for it. It who buys a carpet, for example, right? Some cloth, right? A specific cloth, right? على أنه 10 أذرع ب10 dirham, on condition that it is 10 ذراع, right? For 10 dirham, مثلا, or land, right? On condition that it is 100 cubits for 100,000, ب100 dirham, for 100 dirham, but it turns out to be less, right? Now here, this, a plot of land, right? A plot of land or a specific item of cloth that is affected by cutting, the miqdar is a wasf, right? The length is a wasf, it's just a descriptive quality. That's like the weight of daisy, right? Does the price of daisy relate to her weight? That at the time of sale, daisy was 6.4 kilos because you bought, there's a smokehouse barbecue place in Mississauga. You found out about it, so you got it, but you're so tired from studying, you fell asleep, so your cat ate the whole steak. And then you sold the cat to me. It weighs more than it did before. Would the price go up? You didn't feed it breakfast or dinner. It weighed less. Would the price go down? No. Right? If I sold you this carpet, so I like this carpet. What's your estimate? How what's its length? Roughly. Feet. Are you sure? Can you measure? Can someone measure it with their arm length? This is 50 centimeters. Let's do it. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 5. 5 what? 5 arm lengths, which would be 2.5 meters. Okay, whatever. So let's say I sell you this carpet on condition that it is 7 feet. Turns out to be 6 feet. Right? A difference between a roll of carpet, right? Like the carpeting that the floor to floor, the wall to wall carpeting, and one item is that things that are affected, الذي في تبعيدها ضرر, that if you cut it, it affects the price. Those things, the length is only a descriptor. I'm selling you this plot of land, right? And it's 100 acres, right? Or that's big for a plot of like residential property, or whatever. It's on 1 acre of land, right? Let's say it's 0.92 acres of land. Does it change the price? No, right? So in the length in something affected by cutting, right? The length is merely a wasf, and they say والأوصاف لا يقابلها شيء من الثمن. Whether it be things like a carpet or a unique piece of cloth, a shawl. Let's say a Yemeni shawl. Do you know much about Yemeni shawls? Okay. Let's say they describe, I'm buying this Yemeni shawl that's 1.5 meters long for $10. Let's say it's 1.30 meters. Can I demand a 17% discount? No, right? Because there the length of the shawl is what? Is a descriptor. Right? Could I sell, like if, and if it's longer, can Sheikh Yusuf say, sorry, it's 1.6 meters, let me cut the shawl. I'll decorate my turban with the remaining strings. Right? No, you can't. Right? So this is ومن اشترى ثوبا يضره التبعيض على أنه 10 أذرع ب10 درهم. One buys a thobe that it's 10 ذراع by 10 dirham, or land that it's 100 ذراع for 100 dirham, for example. So one finds it less. فالمشتري بالخيار. The buyer has a choice. إن شاء أخذها بجملة الثمن. One can take it for the named price. Right? And the shawl would be a good example. Why? I'm buying that shawl on the understanding that it's 1.5 meters. Right? Right? Turns out it's 1.25. I can either take it for the named price, because here the length, even though we mentioned it like a condition, is just a wasf. Right? It's not a miqdar. They say al-awsaf la yuqabiluha shay'un min al-thaman. A descriptor does not relate to, is not a criteria for the price. Right? If the shawl were a little longer, it would not be, it was 10% longer, it would not be 10% more. Right? Would it? Have you ever seen that being sold like that? No. Right? So there, فالمشتري بالخيار إن شاء أخذها بجملة الثمن. You can take it for the name price. I'm fine. You got the description slightly wrong. I have a choice, because we did mention on condition that it is. So I can say no. I wanted a particular length because I've never thought about this, but let's say I want my shawl to fall straight at. I want it to cover right up to my knees. My حق. لفوات المقصود. And I don't have to explain why. So I can take it for the name price. وإن شاء تركها. Or I leave it. I take it for the price or I leave it. Right? And he explains لأن الذرع وصف في الثوب, because the length is a descriptor in the thobe. Right? And he says later والوصف لا يقابله شيء من الثمن. Right? And the descriptor is not a basis for the price. Like each, in the shawl, for example, each 100 centimeter, each 10 centimeters is not 50 cents. Right? وإن وجدها أكثر من الذراع الذي سماه فهو للمشتري. And if it turns out to be longer than what was named, right, by the seller, فهو أي الزائد, then the extra is للمشتري. Right? The extra is for the buyer. ولا خيار للبائع. And the seller has no khiyar. Right? And this is, Ibn Abdin mentions a point here, that this is qada'an, in court. Right? But there's a question. وهل تحل له الزيادة ديانة? But religiously, can you keep the extra? Right? فيه خلاف. There's some difference. قلت وظاهر إطلاق المتون الحل. And what appear from the mutun is permissibility. And this is Hashia, page 31, volume 4, page 31 of the Bulaq edition. And some of the ulama explain there that, but there's a conflicting principle here, which is, they say, لا عبرة بالظن البين خطأه. There is no consideration for a judgment that was evidently wrong. Right? So for example, Sheikh Yusuf has two lengths of shawl. He has the compact tareem shawl and the long tareem shawl. Right? The long one's 1.5 meters, the compact is 1 meter. Right? And he has two prices for them. So he sells me the longer shawl, the shorter shawl, let's say. Right? The compact one. The compact one he sells for 20, the longer one he sells for 25. It's not affected by the exact length. We agreed that it's on condition that it's 25, $20 for and on condition that it's 1 meters. Turns out it's 1.45 meters. Can I keep it? No, because you obviously made a mistake. You sold me a long shawl for the price of a short shawl. So that diyanatan, I couldn't keep it. Because this is one of the qawaid fiqhiyya. لا عبرة بالظن البين خطأه. There's no consideration for a judgment that was evidently wrong. Everyone sees, right? That the shawl turns out to be 1.425 meters. And he sells two types of shawls. Short shawl that's 1 meter, long shawl that's 1.5. Which one did he sell me if it's 1.425? It's a long shawl. You just made an error in judgment. So diyanatan, religiously, if I become aware of the fact, I cannot, in court, there may be a judgment, fil qada, but diyanatan, for sure, it wouldn't be halal for me to keep. But he can't beat me up for it. Because he doesn't have authority over me, I don't have authority over him. Right? But then, let's say Sheikh Yusuf decided to export he set up a factory in Tarim. So he learned how do they make long streams of cloth. So he's making flexible sized shawls, right? Making long reams of cloth, and you can choose. So it's long rolls of cloth, and you can choose how long a shawl you want. So he does a different kind of trick. So he says, وإن قال بعتكها على أنها 100 ذراع ب100 درهم كل ذراع بدرهم. Right? If he says, I sell you this, every dhira for a dirham, right? Every 1 foot for a dirham, right? So I didn't just mention the total length, which is just a description, but I have made the description, the length, a criterion. How? By saying every 1 foot for $10. Now I have made, although in general the length of singular items is what? Is a description. It's not a criteria, but by mentioning it specifically in the contract, right? كل ذراع بدرهم. Every cubit for 1 dirham, we have made this wasf a miqdar, a standard for the price. فوجدها ناقصة. Right? So I buy the shawl from, called Welsh Yemeni shawls, right? Wise, right? Welsh Yemeni shawl enterprises, wise, right? Right? Be wise, look like the righteous, right? Right? So he sells it. I buy this shawl for $25 for this 2 meter shawl. Given that $20 for 2 meter shawl, given that every 10 centimeters of shawl is 10 cents or whatever the calculation is, right? So we broke it down. Now we've made the length a criteria. So, and one finds it less. فهو بالخيار إن شاء أخذها بحصتها من الثمن. Turns out to be 1.8. But we made the length now a criteria. I can take, if it's shorter, the buyer has the choice. I can take it for its share of the price. It's 1.8 meters. We said every 10 centimeters is $1. 1.8 centimeters. I'll take it for $18. Because here, though the length is a descriptor, but we turned it into a criteria, an asl, by mentioning how much each unit is, right? And he explains that in the commentary. وإن شاء تركها, but maybe I didn't want a 1.8 meter shawl. I wanted a 2 meter shawl, right? Or whatever other reason. I'm just disappointed. Like, what's up with wives? Like, they get their lengths wrong. وإن وجدها زائدة, but what if it's more? فالمشتري بالخيار. If it's longer, the buyer has the choice as well. إن شاء أخذها أخذ الجميع كل ذراع بدرهم. If it's longer, I can take the whole thing, but for how much the extra length would entail. وإن شاء فسخ البيع. And if otherwise, one can annul the sale. So no, I just wanted 2 meters. It's 2.5 meters. What are you gonna do? Force me to buy it? No. I don't want to pay extra. And I don't want 2.5 meters. So here, there's a number of similar issues. Let's diagram these electronically, like together, like the various cases, the subra al-ta'am, the qati' al-ghanam, the dhira', right? And then, so first, buying them singularly, then what if, there's 3 cases. If they're more, if it's more, if it's less, right? So this, can we do that for next Thursday? That'd be very useful. Okay. You guys want a week? Well, I should be able to do it for Thursday. Okay. So now, so if one is taking notes, this is, we looked at مسألة الزيادة والنقص في المبيع, right? What happens if there's more or less in the item of sale? And these are core issues. There's other things that can arise. What if Daisy gave birth? Right? So there's مسألة الزيادة. There's a ziyada just by, but there can also be a ziyada mutawallida. There's extra by birth, and or an extra that arises upon the sale, and that could be muttasila or munfasila. It could be connected or disconnected, and there's implications of that. Right? You bought a guard dog, turns out it's female, and it gives a litter of puppies. Like, as you finish negotiating the contract, who do the puppies belong to? Right? But what if you bought an item of sale, but it grew, right, during the transaction? Right? What if you sold me a fish, but your cook cooked it, and so the raw fish was worth how much? $50, some fancy fish. But we were negotiating for half an hour. Your cook came out. We had the sale. Said, okay, inshallah, we'll get the cook. We'll get the staff to bring you the fish, however big a $50 good fish would be. And the cook comes and says, sir, this is the best, wood roasted piece of hakitori fish that I've ever. I just sold that. So now the roasted fish, it adds value. Does that belong to me, or what do we do? So that, and the Majalla discusses the section on extra, ziyada and naqs fil mabiya, what happens. We won't touch upon that. But there's many, many issues. But getting the core principles in these issues, and that's helped by diagramming, really helps clarify these matters. Okay. Now, let's say I sold you my iPad, right? So you bought my iPad. However, I took out the processor and the screen. I told you the iPad. I didn't tell you what's in it. Is that acceptable? Okay. What if I sold you, let's say I sold this property. Let's say it belongs to me. But I took out all the walls. So I'm going to move the walls to the old building. Is that reasonable? No. What if I took out the doors? Can you or not? Okay. What if I sold you the building, but I'm emotionally attached to the keys? So there's a lock, but I didn't give you the keys. Why? Because these keys, whatever, I have an emotional attachment. I don't want to give you the keys. I didn't sell you the keys. Pay me $50 for the keys. Right? So this is what enters into a sale and what ما يدخل في المبيع من غير ذكر في البيع من غير ذكر وما لا يدخل. What enters into a sale without mention and what doesn't enter. And it goes back to 2 or 3 key principles, which we'll look at. So he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَمَنْ بَاعَ دَارًا دَخَلَ بِنَاؤُهَا فِي الْمَبِيعِ في البيع وَإِن لَمْ يُسَمِّهِ. Whoever sells a property, the dar is a property. The building enters into it, even if you did not name it. Right? So let's say Zain's moving out, wealthy businessman. He wants to buy a property. The agent shows him around the property. He sees the house. Says, okay, I sell you the property for $2 million, and I move the house. It's a modular home. Say, the house doesn't enter. Is that acceptable? Even if we did not name it in the sale, right? Because why? Because the name dar, property, that is in Arabic, the dar, a residential property, the residence is included, right? In the meaning, right? And there are 2 key principles, as the commentator mentions, right? One is ما يدخل في العرف فهو داخل. What customarily enters is considered to enter, right? So if you buy a computer, do I have to mention, and I'm selling you, let's say I sold you a laptop, but like my laptop has Arabic language keys. So I take out the Arabic language keys. Can you use it? If you sell a laptop, do the keys enter? Do the processor enter? Does the screen enter? Of course it does. Right? Unless I exclude them explicitly. That's number one. What the name of something, what's considered to be included in the urf. And secondly, وهو متصل اتصال قرار, because the house is connected to the property, is permanently affixed to the property. So it is considered to be included. And he says, وَالْأَصْلِ فِي جِنْسِ هَذَا, and in this category of issues, what enters and doesn't, right? The first is, أولا أن كل ما كان اسم المبيع متناولا له عرفا أو كان متصلا به اتصال قرار دخل من غير ذكر. 2 principles. The first is that anything that enters customarily when you sell something is considered to be included. Or if it's permanently connected to it. If I sell you a door, but I don't sell you the door, but I didn't include the doorknob. It's connected to it. Would you believe that? No. Okay. Now in Pakistan, for example, in some cities, there was a fashion at least 12 years ago that people buy and sell property, but because there's so much demand on property in that city, the people are taking out the window panes. Like the whole window pane, not just the glass, but also the pane itself. And it was a fiqh issue. So when you buy a property, the window pane is connected, it's considered to be, unless the urf becomes that all homes are sold like that, right? Then you'd have to mention. Right? And actually, it happened in the place that I was renting in Karachi. They'd taken out the window panes, all the electric units. They'd taken out the floor toilet. They've taken out the whole ceramic thing. There's a hole in the ground. Right? Like even electric outlets. They've taken out the outlets. They're just dangling wires there. Right? It was just a weird situation. But you can't do that unless you made that clear. You want to sell the house like that because you really like those particular window panes, then you have to explicitly exclude it. Okay. ومن باع أرضا دخل ما فيها وإن لم يسمه. And if one buys, or if one sells a land, right, then what is on it enters in it even if one does not mention it. دخل ما فيها يعني مما هو متصل اتصال قرار, of those things that are connected to it permanently. So if you sell a property, do the trees enter into it? Yes. But the fruit that's on the trees, do they enter onto it? No, because the fruit is not permanently there. Right? Right? But if you sell a property and there's a really nice car in the garage, does the car enter? Of course not. Right? Because it's not permanently connected to the property. The same principle, of course, enters into rental agreements. You rent an apartment. What is included and what's not included? Without mention, only those things that are customarily included in the rental of a similar thing are included, or that which is considered permanently affixed. But practically anything that could lead to dispute should be mentioned. It's best to discuss terms well in advance. Right? You think you really like the sofa, just include it in the agreement. It's better to be explicit, particularly in our times when there's widespread ignorance of law and people, and there's a lack of trust. So one needs to be more explicit. Okay. It says ولا يدخل الزرع في بيع الأرض إلا بالتسمية. But crop does not enter into the sale of land except by specifically naming it. Because اتصاله اتصال انفصال. لأنه متصل بها للفصل. So if you buy land, then the crop that is growing on it is not included unless you specified it. ومن باع نخلا أو شجرا فيه ثمرة فثمرته للبائع. If one buys a what's a nakhl? Yeah, date palm tree. أو شجرا. Now shajar, what is shajar? What is shajar? Like birds don't touch the ground when they're flying. Where do you get that from? Good. Someone was awake. Props. Good. So shajar refers to either actual trees, but also anything that grows with a stalk, and that's permanent, right? So like bushes and stuff. So zara, so crop like wheat would not be called shajar necessarily, but even there's difference on that. Does it have to be permanent or not? Right? So there is actually some of the ulama who held that what is a shajar that was eaten from in paradise? Some said it was wheat. Because everything that has saq and has thamar. Thamar is fruit, but fruit does not mean like fruit versus vegetable. Fruit is that it produces something. It also has a more customary meaning, especially now, which is like a tree is a tree, right? But bushes would be considered part of this. Anyways, so whoever buys a date palm tree or tree or shrub, tree or a bush that has fruits or that has crop on it, then the fruits are for the buyer. Right? So here that's why That's why Imam al-Haskafi is my next one. He defines it. What is thamar? ما تخرجه يعني ما تخرجه الشجرة وإن لم يؤكل. That which comes forth from a tree, even if it's non-edible, right? كورد, such as, so in classical Arabic, a rose is considered a fruit in this sense, because هو ما يثمر من الشيء, right? Is that which comes forth from another thing. وياسمين, right? Right? وتوت. What's toot? Yeah, berries, right? So even if you think you know a word, it's always good to say, okay, what is specifically meant, right? Because these are not permanently connected to the ground. It goes back to the principles. إلا أن يشترطهما المبتاع أي المشتري, unless the buyer specified them in the contract. Now, ويقال للبائع, and it's said to the seller, right? This is على تقدير عدم الدخول, when the fruit does not enter, the crop or the fruit is not included in the sale. It is said to the seller, اقطعها, cut it. Because now, upon the sale, whom does the land belong to? The buyer. Whom does the fruit belong to? Seller. So separate your property from it, right? وسلم المبيع, and deliver the property, because holding on to it is ظلم. Unless they're not paying up, then you have a right to hold on to it, right? And if you think about how sales happen, like of valuable things, like property, some people so we have to do this and this and this. Legally, when does a sale happen in Canada? I bought the house, I got the keys. But when does the sale actually take place? There's a whole bunch of these kinds of funny considerations, right? And some people say, like, it's awkward. There's so many stages in buying a house, but some of its legalities. At what point can we be sure that the buyer's rights are secured, the seller's rights are secured, and now you can take the property, right? And there's reasons. ومن باع ثمرة لم يبدو صلاحها أو قد بدا جاز البيع. Whoever sells some fruit, it is valid whether it has ripened or not, right? And thamara, fruit that has appeared. This is important. Bariza. So it has appeared now. We sold it. I want to buy these roses for this bush of roses for $50. But they haven't bloomed yet. They've emerged. If I wanted them to bloom, I should have bought them once they bloomed, right? And it's considered bariz once it's appeared and has reached a state where it has any recognized material value, even if it is for لعلف الدواب, even if it would be, for example, to feed the animals, right? So because لأنه مال متقوم, it's acquired material value, but it needs to have appeared, because بيع المعدوم باطل, because we will see the conditions for valid sale. So لم يبدو صلاحها أو قد بدأ جاز البيع, right? جاز البيع, that the sale is valid, mean it is permitted, meaning it's valid, because it becomes an item of material value. ووجب على المشتري قطعها في الحال, but the buyer must cut it immediately, meaning upon the contract. Now, let's say, Sidi Hamza is deeply in love, so he didn't want to buy a rose for the person they love. He wanted to buy a whole bush full of roses, right? So he got it. He got a really good discount, because he says, he came up with a way of putting roses in the freezer. So he's going to buy, like, an individual rose is $5, let's say. he can buy 100 roses on this bush for $50. Only a problem. They've just appeared, but they've not grown yet. So he buys them from Zain. He's going to like deep freeze them and thaw them and let them bloom. Then realize you can't do that. Now, can he specify that Zain? Okay, you bought it. So now the roses on the bush belongs to you. The roses belong to. So he buys 100 roses, 50 roses, 100 roses for $50 from you. Now, did you sell your bush? No, the bush belongs, rose bush. Bush belongs to you. Roses belong to Zain. It's a problem. What's the problem? They're just buds. So they've emerged, but he thought he could deep freeze them and then let them bloom. So once a week he'd give another rose and he'll spend, 50 cents instead of $5 per rose. Realizes it doesn't work. He Googled it. Can you deep freeze rose buds and let them bloom? No. Yikes. So could we stipulate in the contract that, so what would the sale be? The sale would be, you're selling the roses. But then when you're about to make the sale, after negotiation, you Google the term, can I deep freeze roses? Say no. So we say, okay, I'll buy the roses from you for this price on condition that you let me keep them on the rose bush until they grow in full. What happens here? If you put that condition of keeping them on, they need another month. If we make that condition, what has happened? The seller of the roses owns the bush. Putting condition that you keep the roses on the bush, what is this? Yeah, you're renting. It's as if you're renting the rose bush for a month. Or you're using his property without payment. But this becomes two contracts in one. And it's called and safqatain fi safqa. And the Prophet ﷺ warned against Naha Rasulullah ﷺ and safqatain fi safqa. Because this is a sale contract that contains within it a rental contract. If there's a extra price included. So Abu Hanifa, this could lead to dispute. Right? Because you say, yeah, you can keep it for a month, but after all, you're fed up. I want my rose bush back because now I've sold the roses. I need to trim it. I need to prepare it for the next season. Blah blah blah. Okay. I want my goats to eat the extra. Whatever. I want my kids to play in the backyard. I don't want to be worried about his roses, right? 100 because it can lead to dispute. So let's see. So. فإن شرط تركها على النخل فسد البيع. He said if one stipulates the condition that one keep the roses on the bushes until they ripen, the sale would be corrupt. Why? Because this goes back to the conditions of a contract, right? And we'll see what are the conditions allowed in a contract and what are the conditions not allowed in the contract. Now, what's the problem with conditions in contracts? It can lead to arguments because it can affect the taradi. Because we have to be in agreement at the time of the contract, but you don't want disagreement to arise after. Just imagine, in your backyard, you have these rose bushes, but the transactions, you buy the roses. but you agreed as well to keep them there for a month. In that month, you want your kids to play in the backyard, your cat to run around the backyard, the neighbor's parrot comes and eats his rose. You know, there's two separate things. Now, the way to do it is to separate it into two contracts. To have what's called separate contracts. And in many, commercially, this is often the case. Like if you've ever seen when people sign multiple documents, because you have a number of consecutive contracts. Contract A, contract B, contract C, right? One after the other. So we say, I've agreed to sell the roses and to let Sidi Hamza keep them on my bushes for a month. But actually, if you separate in two contracts, it's not a problem. Contract A stands on its own, which is the sale. Contract B, which is the lease. Because then afterwards, say, okay, we included it. Said, like, why am I keeping your roses anyway? Come and take them. So lead to all kinds of drama. That's theoretically. And that's the transmitted position this is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa. So in general, Imam Abu Hanifa was very, very strict with conditions. And we're going to stop with mention of this, but actually we'll just finish the section quickly. It's not, but in this, we'll be looking at conditions and contracts, but when it comes to the underlying principle was what? إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ تِجَارَةً عَنْ تَرَاضٍ مِنْكُمْ. Except that it be trade through mutual agreement between you. Putting conditions in the contract could affect or cloud taradi, mutual agreement. So there are broadly two types of conditions. There's a condition that's already entailed by the contract, right? Or that clarifies the contract. Mentioning that is praiseworthy. Like in the house. So I'm buying this house, and I was mentioning in Pakistan when I was there, people were taking out windowsills and the windows, right? I'm selling you this house, and the windows included, and the carpet is included, and the doors are included, and it says, what about the doorknob? And the doorknob's included, because that's a condition entailed by the contract, right? Because it just confirms the subject matter of the contract. Another type of condition is a condition that's not entailed by the contract, right? So for example, Wajid Bhai has a really nice suit. So I buy the suit from him for $50 on condition that whenever I wear the suit, I get to wear the fancy topi that he has. There's a condition not entailed by the contract, because is there a relationship between buying the suit and the use of your topi? No. So this kind of condition is not allowed. Right? And there's some more nuance, but this is basically any of these conditions are not allowed. But then there is an exemption. Illa, which is urf, unless the custom is established that this is done, right? Unless the custom is established that it's done, and the condition, and the custom means, a custom is when something is a general practice, right? And then min ghayri niza', right? In thabat al-urf, urfan sahihan, with a sound. So it's not that, yeah, I'm claiming that, of course, anybody who buys a suit gets to use the seller's topi. Why? I do that if I sold you a jacket. No, that's not custom. It's my custom. My family does that. No. Custom has to be general in that area of engagement. Number one, it has to be urf sahih. Number two, لا يؤدي إلى النزاع. It has to be an established custom that does not lead to dispute. Because there's some bad customs, right? Especially in many, here actually most formal commercial transactions in Canada are really sound. You go to any developing country, there's all kinds of drama. The repair person comes, and you ask him, so how much is the fridge repair going to be? What do they say? Fikr mat kare. Musliman bhai. They say all these things. Don't worry about it. We're brothers. In Jordan, they used to say, Khaliha alayna. It's on us. Mish rahin nakhtalif. We're not going to dispute. Then what happens? Oh my God, drama. Right? And that's not allowed. So the custom has to be a sound custom. It has to be established. Number two, it does not lead to dispute. And number three, it does not go against fundamental principles of the Sharia. Because some custom might not lead to dispute, but that's a simplification of the ruling of order. Why are we mentioning all of this? Because according to Abu Hanifa, if you buy the roses, but you stipulate condition, but they've not flowered yet, that on condition that you keep them on the tree till they ripen, that this transaction is corrupt. Now, if the buyer just says, yeah, sure, you can keep it on there without stipulating the contract, that's fine, because that's just you're just freely doing that. That's not contractual duty. But here, if you look at volume 4, page 39 of Hashim ibn Abdin, Bulaq edition, where it says, Fasad al-Bay', this is according to Abu Hanifa and Abu Yusuf. But Imam Muhammad said that this kind of condition is valid because it's customarily established. It's customarily established. And it doesn't lead to dispute. Right? And there's many things. For example, if you buy a home, and the same thing with many things. If you make a rental agreement on the 21st, when does occupancy begin? First of the month, let's say. Now, theoretically, there could be some problems with that Shar'an, but does that lead to dispute? No, right? It doesn't, right? If you rent some property, you buy a property, and the person says, but on condition that I can keep my snowmobile in the shed till December. Fine, right? So would it lead to dispute? No, right? So anything that that's customarily, the like of it's customarily established, it does not lead to dispute and doesn't go against some Sharia meaning. So according to Imam Muhammad al-Hasan, he said the istihsan, right? The legal preference is that it's valid because it does not lead to dispute, right? And this was chosen in Tanwir al-Absar as being the fatwa position. Now, and this was mentioned in Al-Bahr, and he based it on Al-Bahr al-Ra'iq and from some other texts. And Ibn Abdin has some discussion on, but this is the fatwa position, right? That those conditions that are customarily established, but don't go against the principle of the Sharia. But this, of course, when we see this affects employment contracts, etc., because some conditions that are established are problematic Islamically. Like, for example, lengthy non-compete clauses, for example, right? And certain conditions that are problematic. But we'll that's a separate discussion. And so we'll pause there. There's a couple of issues left before we get to the khiyar, but we're not in a rush. We'll take them next time because they do require a little bit of unpacking. Bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Hope the issues today were clear. If we do have questions regarding them, we can. But please do diagram these, and for each one give an example. Right? the, the cases we took today, give an example, and then we'll continue from there. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi. Any questions? Go ahead.